The night the wire went quiet, the whole city seemed to hold its breath. At 2 a.m., lights from dozens of police cars and federal vans cut through the darkness around a small warehouse on the edge of town. Men in bulletproof vests moved like shadows. Radios whispered. K-9 units strained at leashes. On the other side of the state, at the same time, officers in another county blocked a motel where runners slept. In a prison miles away, guards banged on steel doors. On the phones carried in secret, voices stopped mid-sentence. It all happened at once. Inside the warehouse, officers found stacks of packages wrapped in brown paper. They found cell phones, dozens of them, hidden in false bottoms and batteries that were not supposed to be there. They found envelopes with names and town addresses. They found a ledger with codes and short phrases, words that had seemed normal until now, but that matched messages investigators had already been tracking for months. The items were quiet evidence of something much bigger. In the prison, the warden watched monitors and listened to recorded calls. For 2 years, inmates had been sending messages through a web of helpers outside. They used phones not allowed inside the facility. They used friends, family members, and workers to move money and drugs. That night, the screens showed a string of traffic that led from cell phones to safe houses, to a trucking company, to dealers on city corners. The big shock was this: the names on the ledger were linked to more than one state. They tied together people in different prisons and people on the streets in many cities. The group inside the prison was not acting alone. They had built a network. As officers cuffed a man in the warehouse, he kept his head low. He did not shout. He did not run. He had been careful. He thought he was careful. But the map of his conversations, small pieces of talk and short-coded phrases, had already led the investigators to him. "Who did you work for?" a detective asked. The man breathed hard and answered in a low voice, "We worked where the money told us. It's not one gang. It's many hands." A guard in the prison stared at a monitor that showed a picture of a phone seized at the same time. He felt a cold line of worry run down his back. Inmates had ways to move things. They had ways to ask for favors. They had ways to send messages that looked like normal talk but meant something else. That network had just reached across state lines. Then, before anyone could breathe, a new alert popped up on the warden's screen. A tip from a caller: check the truck leaving Route 9. In real time the map showed a semi pulling out. It was already on the road. The warden grabbed the phone and shouted into it, "Stop that truck." But trucks move fast. The call came too late. Out on the highway, blue lights flashed in the distance. A chase began. Across the state line, a runner carrying a small package stuffed inside a coat walked quickly past a bus station. He had no idea the sweep had begun. He had no idea the building with all the packages had just been found. He had no idea that the phones that had been so quiet earlier had started to ring with bad news. And then, just as the sweep seemed to be working, something happened that no one expected. A single voice on a contraband phone in the prison said a sentence that made the hair stand up on the back of the warden's neck. The words were simple, but the meaning was loud. Cut the lines. Burn the lists. What did that mean? Who would burn the lists? Who would cut the lines? The recorded message ended with a click and then silence. In the control room, the FBI agent with the case file looked at the warden. "Who said that?" he asked. The warden pointed to a screen. A man in one of the solitary cells had been the last to speak. He was booked for trafficking, but investigators had always thought he was only a small player. If he had said to burn the lists, then someone had already taken steps to hide the network. Evidence could vanish. People could run. They had to act fast. The raid and the arrests were the biggest single strike investigators had made in months. It was the peak of the long hunt. But the one phrase, "cut the lines, burn the lists," hanged there like a dark promise. It meant that while officials closed in on one set of people, others might be covering their tracks. It meant this story was not over. If what followed was true, then a network run in prisons was smart, it was flexible, and it could survive brief blows. That idea should have been enough to make anyone in the room lose sleep. Yet the evidence was real, the arrests were real, and the first packages were on hold. Now we must go back to the beginning and see how the network grew, how men behind steel bars, using small words and small favors, built a system that touched cities across the United States. The story started with small things. Prisoners trade favors. They share food. They do small jobs for each other. Some men help others get paperwork right. Some teach younger men how to survive inside. For years, this pattern looked like the usual life inside the cells. But for a few, the favors became a business. It began with a handful of smart inmates who had time to watch and plan. They noticed two useful facts. 1. Outside, the drug market never stopped. People in cities always wanted pills, powders, and pills that makers cut or changed. 2. Inside the prison, money moves differently. You cannot use a credit card easily, but you can move value with help, using commissary accounts, prepaid cards, post office money orders, and trusted company employees. The inmates realized they could be the brains for a larger operation. They could tell outside people what to do. They could get messages to dispatchers, set up pickups, and organize payments. They could use people inside families and neighborhoods to carry packages. It did not require the inmates to leave. They had time, and they had minds that could plan. How did a plan jump from a cell to the street? It jumped the way many plans jump in prison, slowly and through small steps. First, contraband phones appeared. Not all at once. The first phone might be a single device smuggled in under a shirt. Maybe a guard found a way to look the other way. Maybe a visitor hid a small flip phone in a box. Once one inmate had a phone, rumors traveled. Others asked to borrow it. Others made a list of numbers. The phone did not have to be smart or flashy. It only needed to get a short message out. Second, the inmates used short language. They could not risk saying "send the pills." They used coded words and nicknames that sounded like normal talk. Investigators later described the language as like a secret shorthand. One word for a time, another word for a drop-off place. That way, a family member on the outside could hear the message and know what to do without others catching on. Third, the inmates reached out to outside helpers. These helpers were not always gang members. Some were family. Some were old friends. Some were people who had small jobs, drivers, security workers, porters, who could move packages without being noticed. In exchange, they got a cut of the profit. The inmate's role was to plan and order. The outside helper did the hands-on part. Fourth, money moved in strange ways. Sometimes it was cash hidden in boxes. Sometimes it was a prepaid card loaded with funds. Sometimes it was small deposits that added up. The inmates kept track on secret ledgers, short notes and sums hidden in a book or a shoe. The ledger would not read like a normal bank record. It would be a simple list of names and short symbols. That ledger was the map investigators would later try to read. At first the scale was small. A few pills here. A small bag there. The money went into commissary accounts and into envelopes carried back to the cell. But as profits grew, the network grew too. One inmate might run a crew in one state. Another might coordinate a route to the border. Their roles gave them power inside. With more power came more room to plan. With more planning came more risk, and more rewards. As the network spread, it learned to hide. Members learned not to write the real words. They used slang and short words that sounded like nothing to an outsider. They used moments like visiting days to pass small notes. They hid phones in food trays, in legal papers, and even in packages delivered by workers. They used people who would not be checked closely. They relied on trust built over years. Outside, the web of places was wide. A truck driver in Ohio might move a curtain load from A to B. A small shop owner in New Jersey might accept a box and then hand it to a courier. A teen in Detroit might pick up a small envelope and deposit a small amount of cash. The network was not a single gang. It was a patchwork. That made it harder to spot. Yet the patchwork left threads. Someone would brag. Someone would get greedy. Someone would make a wrong move. Investigators learned about the network slowly. They watched bank records and small cash deposits. They followed big jumps in commissary money. They listened to calls. Over months, they started to see patterns. A name would reappear in different places. A code phrase would show up in messages from different prisons. A route would repeat. They built lists. They developed a way to match coded words to real actions. That's how the ledger in the warehouse matched what they had heard in prison cells. That's how the truck was traced. That's how, on a slow night of paperwork and patient following, law enforcement found the map that led to the big raid. But running a network is dangerous from the start. Greed and fear push people to make mistakes. The man caught in the warehouse had once been careful, but he had grown bold. He took on more work and trusted a new courier. That courier was not as careful. The ledger was left in a van. The van was seen. The link grew. Even as investigators closed in, the inmates inside the prison watched for risk. They already had plans for loss. They had rules: burn the lists, cut the lines. That phrase, heard on the recorded phone, was not just brave talk. It was a plan for last-minute survival. And now the chapter ends where it started, with arrests, seizures, and the highway chase. The first strike was big. It hit multiple cities. It broke the silence of a network that had seemed hidden and safe. Yet the warning, cut the lines, burn the lists, was a threat and a map. It showed that even when one ring is broken, the rest may change shape. As dawn came, officers counted what they had. They took phones and papers. They arrested men and closed a warehouse. They had done something good. They had stopped a lot of traffic that night. But somewhere, in another cell or a small room far away, someone burned a paper to ash and smiled.